to join. Right, so welcome to Will Lintern. Will Lintern is a pitching and catching coordinator for the GB Baseball National Program. He's a former National Development Manager at BaseballSoftballUK, multi-time presenter at BSUK Coach Summits, and Director of Pitching and Catching and Smarter Performance. Welcome, Will.
Colin, thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Absolute pleasure, always welcome. My name's Colin Barrett. I'm in the back of the BSUK, little sign there. I'm going to hand over to Will. Will's going to be doing his presentation tonight. So all over to you, Will. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Colin. Right, I'm going to share screens real quick. And then hopefully, Colin, can you just let me know that you can see the modern catcher?
All good. GB modern catcher, how catching has changed over the years.
Perfect. Awesome. Right. We're going to get cracking. There should be hopefully a decent amount of content and hopefully lots of stuff for you all to take away and apply in your own environments. Just to get things moving, a little bit of background, just, outside of my bio. And I think the majority of the people on the call are probably familiar with me, but if you aren't, I'm currently the pitching and catching coordinator for Great Britain Baseball. But prior to that, I did have somewhat of a playing career as a catcher. I was fortunate to play in the States, very fortunate to play for Great Britain at a number of levels. And for me, when I look at British baseball and the things that we can do and should be doing to really accelerate the growth and the level of play over here, I think catching continues to be an area that deserves perhaps a little bit more attention than we have given it. It's one of those positions that is so important to the game, but it's hasn't quite got the glamour of being hitting 3 or 4 in the lineup or being the ace on the team, so it doesn't always get that same attention. But that kind of has brought me into this role of pitching catching coordinator and thinking about the development pipeline for catching over here. And I guess one of the visuals and one of the ideas that I've thought of regularly is thinking about this conveyor belt catchers, thinking about what do we need to do as a community, as a collection of clubs, of coaches, as I guess the shareholders of British baseball. What can we do to do a better job of producing more catchers at every level, and in particular from a national team perspective, to have that pipeline of catchers moving up through the ranks, not just at the age group teams, but into the under 23 and ultimately the senior national team as well. For context, we have not had a starting catcher who has been homegrown on the senior national team since about 1994 or 5. We've obviously had domestic catchers at various levels and UK homegrown catchers all the way through up to the senior national team, but a starter we've almost entirely relied on overseas-based players. So I would like us to start making that change at some point. Not that we would ever not have overseas players and overseas catchers, especially if someone happens to be under a minor league or even a major league contract, but it's if those players aren't available for whatever it might reason, it'd be great for us to be able to then slot them into someone who's learned the majority of their trade over here. But that's going to take time, it's going to take effort, and that's what tonight is all about. I also think about catching not just from a national team standpoint, but this kind of baseball for life model, long-term athlete development for the whole of the UK. Sometimes when we think about GB baseball and we think about it, we get lost and stuck just focusing at the top of this pyramid here, this train to win where the national teams are looking to perform. But there's so much other baseball around that. Even if you just think about these development areas where people might be aspiring to make a national team or get into one of the higher league plays in this country, or maybe it's just staying competitive or fit for life. And then certainly we have applications of the position when people are coming into the game, whether that's as a young person through the active start, fundamentals and learn to train sections, or if they're joining it later in life and they're finding their first involvement wherever that may be. But again, there are places and importance for catching and how we teach it and how we deliver it that need to be applicable to everything that's going on. So what we're going to cover this evening, got a lot to get through. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the position. We'll have a little bit of a chat around what the most important job is, and then we'll cover these 4 areas of receiving, blocking, throwing, as well as plays at the plate. And there should still be plenty of time for a bit of Q&A at the end, so long as you haven't got sick of my voice. So when we think about the evolution of the position, and we go all the way back to the start of the game, and catchers standing up and you're not yet learning how to crouch yet with catches like Roger Bresnahan. You can see as Josh Gibson comes to into the game, and then Johnny Bench, how the posture has started to change. Their position is starting to become more athletic. Gary Carter was someone who brought a lot to the table, but we cannot not talk about hitting. And if you're going to talk about hitting and the position of catcher, then it's going to be Mike Piazza, even if some of his other catching tools weren't quite up to par with his peers. And then, of course, if we're going to cover throwing, you can't not mention Pudge Rodriguez and everything he did for the game. And then if we think about catching in general and everything that it encompasses, then Yadier Molina is probably the catcher to cover just about everything. And given the number of World Series rings he has, the number of Gold Gloves he has, the number of pitchers he's caught with won Cy Youngs, he encompasses just about everything that we probably look to in a catcher. But then we have the new guard that have come in, and how they are changing the game and how the game is changing around them. And there's a lot of thought of always, is it got better? Has it got worse? Where's all this newfangled one knee catching come from? But what's interesting is it's not really that newfangled. It's been around for many, many years. And that's part of what I want to cover this evening, is this thought of what's old is new and what's new is old, with the exception of maybe equipment. Equipment is the one thing that has evolved over the time, and I hope for everyone's sake that we don't go backwards. But again, it's a good reflection to think about how the position on the field, both from a technical standpoint and from an equipment standpoint, has evolved. Have our coaching practices evolved and kept up with those times? And that's one of the things we're going to look into. So I want to do a quick Zoom poll. And so, Colin, if you are able to launch the poll, hopefully that will come up on everyone's screens. And I just want to get a sense of what we feel the most important job of the catcher is: receiving, throwing, plays at the plate, blocking, hitting, fielding the position, or leadership and game management. So hopefully that poll's up. Colin, if we haven't been able to share it, let me know.
Right, it's up on my
There
side.
we go. Cool. Awesome. I see it coming up now. So yeah, click on whatever your answer is. Just want to get a sense of what the guys in the group think is the most important job of the catcher. Hopefully it should be relatively straightforward. Hopefully we'll get a few answers coming in.
Right, I'm going to try and launch again. Jess has just come up saying they can't see. A couple of people are saying they can't see the poll.
Okay.
What I'm then going to do is I'm going to just close the poll again. Let me just see what else I can do, because when Will and I did sort it out before everybody arrived.
I'm going to stop share real quick and just see if that fixes it. Let's see if we can get a
okay, let's
poll up.
try again. Someone just type in the chat box, please, just to see, tell us that you have seen it or can see it or can't see it. Jess Vernon, still no.
Okay, awesome. In which case, then we're going to go back to it. We'll do the bootleg version. Yeah, Sid, go with what Sid has just done. Put in the chat box what you believe the most important job of the catcher is: receiving, throwing, plays at the plate, blocking, hitting, building the position, or leadership and game management. I'll give you the list again in just a sec once I share it. There we go. You should now see my screen. So yeah, feel free just to pop in the chat. We got a lot of receiving coming in. Ooh, Paul's coming in with leadership and game management. I love it. Give you guys a couple more seconds. Kevin, I like your option, receiving, if there's no all of the above option. Such a great point around catching, is it's hard to pick one out of any of them because there are so many things that go on the field. Right, I'm going to move on at this point. So the answer, of course, well, I say of course, it could be any of them in many ways, but if we think about the skill that comes up the most often is going to be receiving, just in terms of the number of balls that the catcher has to receive in the game and the ability they have to impact the outcome, so to speak. And then as you move down the order, blocking and throwing are in that order, probably the most important. I think where it maybe differentiates a little bit for us in comparison to Major League Baseball, there's a clear, obvious winner in receiving, blocking, and then throwing, mostly because people are stealing less than they used to. Where if we play a game where there's, base running is a mile a minute, throwing might be a little bit more important in comparison to other areas. However, this was a bit of a trick question because there was another option that I didn't include on my list, which was safety. And I think this is something that is not often talked about enough, but just thinking about how we keep catchers safe, how we keep them physically prepared, robust, so they can perform, every day if they're in the professional or collegiate environment, week to week, if it's in a club environment. But in a national team, we go away for 5, 6, 7 days. How can we keep our catchers safe and in the game for as much as possible? And I think one of the things I want to make sure that we cover is, as we're looking at all these technical points, how we can bring out those points of safety into our coaching practice. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, just a quick word on coaching and how I like to think about the sorts of things we should be doing as coaches. And you can oversimplify it sometimes, but that helps a little bit for us to look at these two environments. The one on the left, where you've got me interacting with the catchers, could be classed as information led. The one on the right, where it's an inter-squad, is more context led. And what do we mean by that is that there is a spectrum of the game, with at one end of the spectrum being the live game, it's all in, all out. And the other end of the spectrum is your most simple basic drill, where you might be working on your own and trying to fix something and thinking about what does that spectrum look like. Now, we as coaches, when we're trying to help players out, if we think about oftentimes when we're coaching, if we're entirely information led, that creates an environment where techniques are memorized in isolation of themselves. Learning is done to the player, specifically meaning the solutions. I, as a coach, or you as a coach, are providing solutions to the player. And that just doesn't happen in the game. That's not how the game works. So it might be better for us to think about a more context-led approach to coaching, where the context of the skill, so where is it occurring? It's all well and good us having some great drills and fancy equipment, but if it's in a gym with a tennis ball and the balls are being flipped at 10 miles an hour, is that really like being outside on a dusty field when the pitcher's throwing 90 miles an hour with a slider that bites off the plate? So we got to think about the context and how we as coaches can apply that context to help the players develop and learn and critically retain their skill. Learning is done by the player, and critically the solutions are found by the player through practice. So a nice way to think about this is, if it's information-led, we're a little bit more in the space of the task-based drills. If we're context-led, we're more game-based drills. And it's not to say that one is better than the other, as a blanket rule. In general, games-based skills are going to help those skills show up in games more. But there's going to be a time and a place for task-based skills, where you're going to need to slow things down, make things a little bit more simple. And maybe you need to provide a solution to a player who's just stuck. But I just want to make it clear that we shouldn't be living in either camp in isolation. And most of us coaches, I think, get stuck in that task-based drills. If you want to dive into this a little bit more, I pulled some of this from an article on the website athleticperformanceacademy.co.uk. You can have a look at their stuff. There's some good things in there. So now, moving on. Journey, we're going to break down these areas of receiving, blocking, throwing, plays at the plate, thinking about what matters and the principles of each skill, the old school versus new school techniques, common issues that continue to come up, and then looking at the key points where they merge with what matters, and then finally giving you some drills and looking at some of the drills I'm going to give you are task-based. Some of the drills are going to be game-based, and think about why that works and why that doesn't necessarily work in some cases. So let's kick off with a big one. Most important job of the catcher, which is receiving. Now, when we think about receiving old school versus new school techniques, old school, we very quickly get stuck into just there's a primary stance, there's a secondary stance, and that's it. Whereas new school, what you have to do is pay attention to the game. You see a lot more one knee setups. The framing is maybe one of the other big areas that has really changed. When I was playing, it was all about framing. You want to turn the glove into the plate. You want to make it look like you've caught the outside of the ball as if it's clipped the outside part of the plate. But what we see now is a lot bigger glove movement, and invariably there's not an awful lot of turning. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. and then swaying to center the ball. So I was taught that you want to try and catch the ball in the middle of your body, because you're stronger, which is a true fact. You are in a stronger position, but critically, we want the umpire to see the ball in the middle of your body, because that's going to help him think it was a strike. Not necessarily true. And if we look at new school receiving techniques, we're seeing a lot more on the side of having a quiet body. One other thing, if we think about safety, this hand down here on the bottom left with McCarver, we could probably do without that. As someone who has had their fingernail come into contact with a foul ball before, I can tell you, you want to keep that hand out of there as much as possible. So common issues that we continue to see. And look, this here is a rather unfortunate photo, but it serves as a good point for us to stop and pause as coaches thinking about safety. Foul balls off of a catcher's face mask is one of the leading causes of concussion for catchers. I mean, we also have plays at the plate and a couple other things, but this is one of those areas that we as coaches have a duty of care to make sure that we're doing our best to check for concussion. We're doing our best to make sure our players' safety is kind of at front and center of our mind. So if you're in a game or a practice environment and a catcher wears one off of the face, and regardless of what type of mask they're wearing, you should take some time to go check them out. Make sure they have a glass of water. Have a look at how their eye movement is doing. If you are not qualified to, or you're not aware of how to assess the initial signs of concussion, then that might be something that you should make sure at least one of your staff members is able to do, or make sure you're able to point them in the right direction should they need to go to hospital later in the day. But common issues for receiving as a skill. Number one is taking the ball out of the zone. Number two is struggling with velocity and movement. Anytime we get a pitcher who's throwing hard, who has good breaking stuff, it gets a little bit trickier. Glove arm being too extended, too far away from the body. For anyone that's not sure what I mean by this, we could take a look at this clip right here. Now on the surface, looks okay, doesn't look too bad. But as we slow it down, you can see there's a lot more glove movement than we maybe need there to be. There's that double move where he drops down before he receives it. And as we slow it down towards the end, what I want you to notice is a couple things, and we're going to go back again and play it another time. The things I want you to notice is as he catches the ball, how straight his arm is. So that's being too extended. You'll also notice that he's pushing the ball out of the zone as he catches it. And the biggest reason for this is his glove is above the ball. So even though he starts below the ball, he then comes up, that glove gets above the ball, and then the only solution is to go chase it and push that ball down and out of the strike zone. Now the umpire was behind the home plate, behind the mound on this particular play, but if he's behind the catcher, it gets really tricky to see what that glove is doing if the first move is down. And for me, that's the number one thing that we do not want our catcher to do. Our pitcher's done an amazing job of throwing the ball. Look at where that ball is in relation to the hitter. It's right at the knees. But if the umpire blinks or the umpire misses it, or maybe there's just an opportunity to win a strike and our catcher punches it down out of the zone, then we're not doing a particularly great job. It's not just amateur catchers that struggle with this. We've got Wilson Contreras here, and the point of this video is to have a look at some of the adjustments he's made. So the one on the right was his original receiving position. You notice how the move is his glove comes up, and then he has to chase that ball down, and as he catches it, we get stuck at the bottom of the zone. The one on the left, 2 seasons later, he made a concerted effort to work from low to high, meaning he's keeping his glove below the ball for as long as possible, and he's able to catch it in one smooth movement so that there isn't that opportunity to push it out of the zone. That's what we're looking for, and those are some of the issues that we see when it comes to catchers in particular. And then we have poor setups and stances, catchers not getting into great positions, kind of being a thing that kind of holds us back right from the get-go. Particularly, we see this in youth catching, but it's not exclusive to young people. So what are we looking for in a stance? We have our traditional 2-point stance, 2 points because there are 2 points of contact in the ground within both feet. The thing I want you to notice most of all are his heels are plugged into the ground, or at least the majority of his whole foot are plugged into the ground. That might change a little bit depending on how he shifts his weight, but for the most part, we're looking for that full foot contact. But we're also seeing left knee down stances, right knee down stances, hybrids, meaning you've got that right leg kicked out to the side. But the other thing that we don't often get right is the distance from the hitter. Better to be closer than too far away for a couple reasons. Number one, primary role is receiving. It's really hard to receive when the ball hits the dirt. And the second reason is we want to make sure that we give the umpire the best view of home plate and the ball as possible. So not only are we trying to make sure we're not having to catch too many dirt balls, but we're trying to give the umpire the best view possible. Best place to be is about an arm's length away from the batter's back foot. If you can just about touch the toe of his back foot, you're in a good place. Now you might feel, oh, I'm really close and I'm going to get catcher's interference a little bit. In general, I'm okay with trading 1 or 2 catcher's interferences a year for the improvements we'll see as a catcher or a receiver by getting that little bit closer to home plate. The goal of a stance, whatever stance that our catchers are going to take, is to get them into the ground, meaning they're connected to the ground, they're able to put force into the ground, they're able to be in a strong athletic position. So I'm not too precious, and we can talk about the differences between them, about what a catcher does, so long as they are in a position where the heels are in the ground and they've got at least one other point of contact with the ground where possible. So our key points of receiving: wind strikes, presentation. What do I mean by this is your goal as a receiver should be to catch as many strikes that are strikes and convert as many borderline or low percentage strikes into strikes as possible. And how do we do that? Through presentation, meaning we want the ball and the glove to look the same to the umpire as much as possible. I'm going to say that again. Think back to old school receiving where we turn the glove in, and then even, you go wind the back clock further into the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when catchers would turn the glove up from underneath and turn it, at quite extreme angles to make it look like it's just clipped the edge. Every time that happens, the umpire is seeing a different view of the glove. Whereas what we now understand is it's far better for the umpire to see the same thing every time. If you're struggling to get a sense of what that looks like, imagine this angle here as we're looking over the catcher's shoulder, seeing that ball come in. Every single pitch, and this is a breaking ball, by the way, so this is a curveball, but every single time the umpire sees a ball arrive in the strike zone, this is the view we're trying to give him. Flat glove, roughly the same position in the strike zone. We may move it more to the middle on pitches that are closer. We may not be as aggressive if the ball is, if it's missing outside of one of our knees per se, but we're trying to give that umpire the same view so that they have a better chance of calling the pitches that we want to get. Working low to high, we've talked about that already, but just to reinforce that point, so we want to get underneath the ball to be able to move it back into the middle to win more strikes, but also so we're not punching that ball out of the zone. In principle, control the baseball. Pitchers are going to miss their spots, but it's our responsibility to control it. We're going to limit wild pitches, but it's also about building confidence in the pitcher, letting him know, letting her know that we're there to look after them and handle the baseball on their behalf. Also, it's helpful to handle and develop confidence with the umpire. If they know that you're going to handle balls out of the strike zone, they're more likely to stay in there and give you those borderline calls, as opposed to having to dive out. And then the final part, when we think about being safe, is the thumbs. And again, this was a change for me when I was taught for the inside fastball. You turn that glove around to try and turn it back into the zone. What we now realize is that is one of the easiest ways to catch your thumb. Right? If you go along with me at the moment, if you set your hand up as if you're going to catch a fastball or a changeup, and you've got your thumb pointed down, as that ball moves to the inside part of the plate and you turn that thumb up, you are exposing your thumb to the ball, and it's potentially really easy for it to catch it, especially if it's running. If you keep that thumb down for as long as possible, you're able to show the pocket to the ball. So not only are you able to move the ball back to the middle of the plate, as per we're seeing Posey here, but also we're putting our thumb in a great position. That was one that took me a while to kind of get a handle of, and there is going to be a point in time where you can't move that hand any further and you're going to need to turn it over. If this ball jutted out towards the hitter's back right knee, his back knee, for example, there's no way to catch in that position. Posey would have to turn his thumb over, but that just kind of gives you a sense of what the types of positions we're looking for. But the bottom line is that the umpire's decision is the only one that matters. So if we think about building confidence with the umpire, building that relationship with the umpire, what matters most is that we're, working with them, not showing them up, and making sure that we're also handling any disgruntlement coming from our bench or the pitcher in particular, recognizing that doesn't matter how angry anyone gets, least of all us as catchers, the umpire is always going to be the one who has the final say with these sorts of things. So to give you some examples of some drills that we like to use on receiving, so I've got some bare hand drills here. Big fan of using bare hand drills. You can use them with a number of different balls, tennis balls. This drill here is heavy balls, just different weighted sand balls or plyo balls. And it's again, just trying to get players comfortable receiving, being aware of what position their hand is and how they can accept the ball. I particularly like heavy balls. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail because it's really hard to replicate high velocity baseballs. Like, unless you have someone who throws 90 plus miles an hour or a pitching machine, it's really hard to do this in a practice environment. And I'm not saying that heavy ball is going to do it for you, but the act of catching something heavier is going to help the body organize itself into a way that's going to be better for dealing with higher velocity pitches. You can't catch a heavy ball, or excuse me, a ball that is heavier than a tennis ball less efficiently and it look good, or you'd be able to achieve the task. So just by changing the ball and the equipment you're using, it can help make that drill a little bit more appropriate for you. Right, if we move on to low to high drill. So we're just trying to think about what can we do to reinforce that position of getting our glove underneath. So we're in this scenario, we're literally just rolling the balls back and forth between catchers. And the reason we're doing it is if we think back to the catcher who was struggling with it, or even Wilson Contreras, it's so easy for when that ball comes out of the pitcher's hand, you lift that glove up because you want to do, you want to catch it. It's what your eyes do. It's you're getting excited about it. By rolling the ball on the ground, we're forcing the catcher to keep their glove on the ground. There's no way that they can lift the glove up, and this is going to be a successful drill. So it's constraining them in an environment to think about what it looks like and how it feels to work from low to high. Progressions that we can use would be a short hop. So that would just be like an infielder. So as opposed to rolling it, we could bounce it, and then a nurse shock. For anyone who knows what a nurse shock is, this will make sense. And if you don't, you just have to trust me. But a nurse shock, their mouth is underneath them, so you can kind of almost hover the glove on the ground, keeping it in contact the whole time while someone throws you the ball, and at the last minute, boom, glove comes up. And moving on to our next one, then we have live variations. So we're blending two drills here. So I've got varied balls. So again, we would use baseballs, we can use tennis balls, we can use weighted baseballs, we can use plyo balls, use big balls, whatever, small balls, whatever it might be. The thing I like about it is it just, again, it's forcing the catcher to find a solution. And the variation that we've gone here as well is the walk up. So the pitcher is in the same position, or the thrower is in the same position, and the catcher is taking about 3 or 4 reps, and they're changing their stance every single time. Just again, trying to blend things, trying to make things, it's not quite game-like, but varying the distance that they're able to receive the ball is going to make it more challenging. Sometimes the balls are going to come out faster, sometimes they're going to be slower. And then a nice one to do is to go all the way back to your starting point to really feel the change in how that ball might be received. 2 other variations that I like to use are angled. So that would be, you can have 2 or even 3 people throwing from different angles to the catcher, and they have to get comfortable receiving the ball. If you don't have multiple people throwing, the coach, for example, you could walk in like a half moon or semicircle around the catcher, throwing them or flipping them balls from different angles. And then if you really want to ramp it up and you have the tech available, they're putting a machine in, so you can get some real, some real movement or some real velocity on it, just to make it even harder. And then blending the machine with the walk-ups can get really interesting. Okay, receiving drill. So 2 things, best value equipment out there, genuinely, this All-Star mini glove, it's 27 inches, and plyo balls. I've already talked about plyo balls and their value, also great for throwing. You can get them from a company in this country, actually, which is quite handy. Mansfield Sport Group has a package. I think it's about £60 for a set of 6, which might feel a bit dear, but this is a great investment for your club or your environment, because not just from the throwing side, but from a hitting and especially from a catching side, which is what we are talking about. Also, though, this All-Star mini glove, this was introduced to me by a friend and mentor of mine, Zach Grafser, who pointed out that when you're using a glove of this size, if you don't catch the ball in the pocket, it pops out. So again, it's that environment where you don't need a coach to tell you what's going on. Ball in pocket, good job. Ball pops out of pocket, bad job. The glove is teaching the catcher the sorts of positions they need to get into. If you're still not sure about why heavy balls are so great, this is the best example I have for you. So this was a fairly close range flip, but you can see how that heavy ball, as soon as it enters the catcher's glove, highlights to him, most importantly, more important than us as the audience or me as the coach, highlights to him that he's not in a strong position because his glove is being dragged down. If he was able to stay under the ball as opposed to getting above it, he would have a much better chance of receiving. So again, this is another reason why I love using heavy balls in this environment with catchers. Okay, moving on to blocking. Again, old school versus new school. Blocking, old school, just in a secondary stance. Now we're thinking about, can we do it from a one knee setup as well? The technique was, just replace your feet with your knees, drop down, kick your feet back. That's the way how we do it. Now we're actually seeing that the ball depth, so where it is bouncing, is dictating not just our posture, but the type of footwork that we use. And then it was always about angling ball back to home plate, because that's what we want to do. But as we'll talk about in a minute, sure, angling the ball back to home plate is great, but that's not always really what we're trying to do. And the goal of this is actually to recover and be in a position to continue to play forwards. Common issues that we see with blocking. Number one is trying to catch it as opposed to blocking it. Number two is violent movements. If you think about replacing your feet with your knees, sometimes that can cause a movement that either jams the knees into the ground or a little jump occurs and it's just inefficient, and we're not necessarily as soft as we should be. And then poor posture meaning either you're leaning too far forwards and the ball pops over your shoulder, you're too far back and it pops up, or you're side on and it scoots away and it's not in a great position. And this photo here is, to be fair, probably not necessarily a bad block. We don't actually know, and we'll talk about why we don't know in a second, but it was a pretty good example. If you see the way the ball is bouncing, maybe this catcher is trying to catch it as opposed to doing a good job of leading with their glove and putting themselves in a great position. So it's unfair of me to judge the catcher, but it was the best illustration I could find with trying to catch it. So the other thing to remember as coaches, especially if we're introducing this, is blocking can be scary. It's a weird thing to do. Hey, put on this gear and I'm going to bounce balls at you as hard as I can throw them, and you need to stop them, and you're not allowed to use your glove, and you need to watch it the whole time. It's a weird thing, and part of our understanding of the position is catchers have a little bit of weirdness about them. So we as coaches need to have that understanding about it, and understanding and giving time for players to adapt, especially those new to the position. Key points for blocking. Number one, block first mentality. We want catchers, when there are runners on base, to be expecting the ball in dirt. Doesn't mean it should be cheating, but we should never be surprised by a ball in dirt, especially with off-speed pitchers, and especially with a pitcher who's struggling with command or control on that day. Lead with the glove. Most important part. If nothing else, we want that hole between our legs, often referred to as the 5-hole, covered. If you do nothing else, make sure that glove is down. And we can see here, Chirinos is doing a fantastic job. The very first thing that happens before anything else is that glove is down. He doesn't catch it with his glove, but his glove is covering that hole between his legs. Center the ball, meaning we're trying to get our belly button to the ball. Wherever the ball is, our belly button goes. We use our feet, we use our legs, we use whatever we have to get there, but we're trying to get our belly button to the ball. Track it with your eyes. So this is the point about that posture. Two things are going to happen with tracking the ball with your eyes. One is your shoulders will then adapt to where the ball is being bounced, or where the ball is bouncing. What do I mean by that? If the ball bounces really close to you and you therefore track it all the way into your belly button and lean forwards, then that ball, you're going to be able to angle that ball straight back down into the ground. But if the ball is bouncing further away from you, if you were to do that same move by focusing on your shoulders, that ball is going to bounce over your shoulders. A better solution is to watch that ball. And if you track it with your eyes, you're going to see it come up and bounce into your chest, or hopefully still your belly button. But that's going to force you to keep a little bit more upright posture to keep that ball in. The other thing it does is set you up for recovery, which is possibly and arguably the most important part of blocking. And the final piece, back to safety. If your eyes go down and you see it bounce off of your chest plate, then guess what's happened to your chin? Chin's down, throat is protected. We're in a great place. So just by tracking the ball onto our chest plate, we're taking care of so many different checkpoints. It's going to help make us a better blocker while still remembering the old school point of chin down to protect your throat. Throwing hand behind glove, we can see here that his hand is a little bit out to the side, but the goal was the same. I'm trying to protect my hand. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't get damaged by a ball bouncing up off the ground. So I'm doing my best to try and get my hand behind my glove where possible. And then we're coming back to this point, which I've kept mentioning, recover the ball. What do I mean by that? Well, why are we blocking? The most important part is that we're trying to find a way to stop the runner advancing. And what matters most is that after the ball hits the deck, we block and we recover. And the question you should be asking yourself and you should be asking your players is, did the runner advance? That's what matters. Doesn't matter how pretty the block was. You know, this is contact right now. So from this play right here, right? This is our block and recover. When the ball hits his belly, this is his position. Is that a textbook block? You won't find that in any catching textbook in the world. You won't find any coach or coaching course telling you this is how you should block. But did it matter? Does it matter? Was it a good block? Well, the only thing that matters is, did the runner advance? And the answer was no. So this is a great block. So how do we now practice this? We're going to start with some rolled balls. Again, similar to receiving, we're going to make it as simple as possible. This part here, we're just rolling the ball in and we're focusing on two things: being as late as possible with our movement and watching the ball, tracking it with our eyes. And notice how as that ball comes in, you can see the deeper it is, he tracks it into his, well, essentially what is his glove for the purpose of this drill, but his posture follows his eyes, which puts him in a great blocking position. Progressions from here, we can then have them stand up. We can have him start with his hands, hands down, but he's up on his knees, up ultimately into a full block, but still rolling it. And you can then start adding in short hops, and you could even go different balls if you wanted to. But that's probably the easiest progression to start with. What you see here is this point. This is a task based. This is not going to happen in a game. We're not going to get a ball rolling on the ground like this in a game environment, but that's okay, because we as coaches have made a very deliberate choice to say, we are going to focus on this specific movement. Maybe we're going to even use it as a way to develop confidence for someone who's learning to block. It's what's important isn't whether it's task-based or game-based. What's important is we're making that conscious decision that we're going to use this drill because it's going to help the player in that environment. Other blocking progressions that we might use. We can start with them down on the knees while having balls bouncing in, so it doesn't just have to be rolled. Then we can have them standing up and leading with the glove, so being really deliberate that their glove is already down. And then we move on to the full stance. And then our final progression, which is what you're seeing in the video here, is thinking about that recover, recover position. How many times in each of these drills can I make it more game-based than task-based? If they're already down on their knees, it's more task-based. But if I add in a recovery, does that make that more game-based? Even here, we're in a gym. I'm about 30 feet away, if that. How can I make it more game-based? You know, you can certainly add in the recover. Probably a good option is to mix in some off-speed pitches, breaking balls, change-ups, things like that. How can we make it more like the experience they're going to have it in the game? Also recognize the ball is going to bounce differently on that gym surface. The other thing to think about is practicing multiple stances. Not saying you have to block from one knee, not saying you have to block from your traditional secondary stance, but it's really worth us exploring what works for each catcher. Maybe there's a different stance that works for a different pitcher. And then also just thinking about the scenario. Where are the runners on base? Are there runners on base? How does that change? But we only find that out if we're willing to explore these different stances with our catchers. Okay, moving on to throwing. I mentioned it earlier, but you can't talk about throwing and not mention Yadier Molina, someone who kind of took the game forwards post-Pudge to give us a new era of what it means to be a great thrower. We also can't talk about throwing without talking about this play.
Chance for Brazil, a man on 2 outs. Daniel Cooper pitching. Juan Carlos Muniz caught stealing on the play. Great Britain hangs on for the 4-3 win.
That was the out that sent us through to the final of the last World Baseball Classic qualifier. You know, never supposed to make the last out of an inning, let alone the game at third base. But that's exactly what Brazil did. And thanks to our catcher, Chris
In the
Bissett,
ninth, last chance for Brazil. A man on, 2 outs. Daniel Cooper pitching.
we had an opportunity to then go and play in the final against Israel. So moving on, throwing, old school versus new school. Throwing used to be exclusively out of secondary stances. Now we're also throwing out of one knee setups. Used to be all about catching with two hands. Whereas now we're thinking about transferring deep, but thinking about receiving the ball, receiving the pitch first. And then we have the actual action and movement when we think about, if you look at Johnny Bench here on the left, using almost a jump pivot. And one of the teachers that were given to myself and other catchers is that we wanted to gain ground towards second base. We wanted to minimize the difference or the distance we had to throw. But now we're in a position where actually we're just trying to keep the feet under the body and get rid of the ball as quick as we can with a nice strong throw. Common issues I see with throwers, particularly in this country: too big or too many steps. So too big meaning, it's like that Johnny Bench move. We're coming up and we've just got these long, deliberate steps and everything takes too long. Or the opposite, just too many steps. It might be short and snappy, but we're taking 4 or 5 or worse 6 steps before we get rid of the ball. Reaching, so that glove hand is getting too far out. That's not helpful for a couple reasons. One, it's not a very efficient way to transfer the ball because the ball is moving faster than our glove, but also it's taken away that opportunity to get a called strike, which is our primary responsibility. And then robotic movements, so just being really rigid and getting kind of stuck in a position. So a nice way to think about that is just, we want our catchers to be athletic. When we think about throwing, some of the key points we're looking for here, and we've got a couple of different catchers going through some of their movements. First off, a quick and deep transfer. If you look at where the catchers are transferring the ball in relation to their body, they are not reaching out in front. They're letting that ball get there. They're letting the ball arrive, come to them, and then they're getting rid of it as quick as they can. Feet under the body. BF, FF, attack. BF is back foot. FF is front foot, attack. Back foot to where the front foot is, and then attack where you want to throw. Let's say that again. You take your back foot to where your front foot is, and then we attack and throw. Arm strength matters. These are tricky throws. This is over 120 feet. We don't get the footwork under us like outfielders do. We don't get to shuffle in a way that infielders do, and we don't get to wind up like pitchers do, but we still have to throw the ball as hard as anyone. So arm strength does matter in our training, and we should be aware of that as coaches. But also don't forget our primary job, which is to receive the baseball and win as many strikes for our pitcher as possible. Cool, we can potentially throw someone out, but just as important is making sure we get that strike on the hitter, and even a strike 3 if the opportunity presents itself. When thinking about your performance, did you make a quality throw? That's what matters. Just some general points on throwing. For anyone who's been around me knows I can't not talk about throwing and throwing drills. Always been a big fan of, and it's very much a tribute to to my former mentor Bill Holmberg and the work he did around throwing. But we should all be including some level of pre-throwing, including bands and plyo throws that you see here, and long toss and intent-based drills. Intent-based in this case is the Marshall drill that we use to get our hips and our arm action in a great position. Something particularly for catchers, I mean for everybody, but especially catchers, is when they're performing long toss, think about having a black line on the ball. What this does is it's going to give them feedback, and the way that mini glove gives you feedback when the ball's popping out of your pocket, putting a black line on the ball is going to give you feedback on how true that ball is spinning. We need that ball to be spinning as close to a backspin as possible to get it accurately and on a line to second base. So we want that nice tight backspin, and all you as a coach have to do is draw a line or using a Sharpie or getting some piece of black electrical tape on your baseballs, let your catchers play catch, and they can use that to teach themselves. Obviously, you need to give them some guidance. You can't just give them a ball with a black line and hope they figure it out. You need to give them some tips on where they should be thinking and what they should be looking for, and if they get stuck, what they might want to do to fix it. But again, rather than you telling them, good, bad, indifferent, and how to fix it, this black line is going to help you achieve or help them find the solution for themselves. And in general, just become better at throwing things. This can be a baseball, this can be a pliable, this can be American football. I don't really mind, but we should just become, just passionate about becoming better at throwing things. And I do believe everyone should learn to throw like a catcher. It's a challenging throw, but it requires efficiency. And it's a nice way for anyone who needs to improve their throwing to spend some time doing it. Even if they never catch, it's a nice way for them to improve their arm position. And we might come back to that with a little bit more context. So drills that we can use to develop some of these skills. And I'm going to ask you to, again, join in a little bit at the end of this slide. I've got a question. So get your fingertips at the ready with the keyboards, because I've got a question for you guys based on some of the things we've already talked about. But for the setup for this transfer drill, we're going to start on our knees and the ball is going to come in. And it's that simple. We're just going to transfer. We're going to think about what is that high L, that power position look for. And we're just trying to isolate that transfer. You can have them pause at the top, or you can have them throw back. Doesn't matter. We're just trying to isolate that glove movement, not worry about what the feet are up to, and just spend some time there. You can also have some fun with a mini glove and a paddle glove or a flat glove that infielders would use. If you do use a paddle glove, you got to make sure that the feed as a coach is going to their back shoulder. It's no good if you go to their front shoulder and they try and smack it back with the paddle. It needs to be to their right shoulder so they can almost transfer it like a double play feed into their throwing hand. And again, continue to track the ball with your eyes. Make sure you're just in a good position as you're getting ready to transfer and receive it. So my question to you is, what do you see? Is there anything here? What do you see from some of the thoughts we've had on common issues from our catchers that we may want to address with this catcher? Go ahead and type a couple answers in the chat box, and then I'll give you the biggest thing that I see. Hopefully you guys are still listening and you haven't just zoned out and I'm not just talking to myself, which is obviously a possibility.
I'm still here. We're good.
Cool. Awesome. Right. So what do you see? Give me something that you can see that we as maybe a work on for this catcher here. Just type it into the chat box. You don't need to unmute. Oh, good, Sean. I love it, man. Yes, glove dropping, and Chris Ward's got the other one too. Fantastic. We've got both of them. So we've got our glove dropping, and you can see how that glove is high above the ball, and then that reaching is pushing the ball away. So in an ideal scenario, we want to adjust our starting position, as Kevin has pointed out, so we're a little bit lower, and then let that ball get a little bit closer to us so we can transfer right in front of the chest, right in front of the eyes, making sure that transfer as deep as possible. We are going to have a couple more of these, so do keep your fingertips ready. Next up is thinking about throwing drills. Back knee down. I've got this in here for two reasons. One, throwing from a knee down stance is becoming more and more common. I don't think it is exclusively for major league catchers. There is a narrative that says, well, major league catchers are the most athletic in the world, so they're just the ones that should be doing it. I don't think that's necessarily true if you follow what works best. If someone really struggles to throw because all they do is they stand up and they take too many steps, then maybe putting them in a knee down position is a good thing. The second thing is, if your pitcher is mostly around the middle of the plate and you don't have to worry about moving side to side, then maybe it actually benefits you to spend most of your time in a knee down stance to get them the strikes they need. Then you sacrifice a bit of the throwing power by going to a right knee down stance. That's a little bit more nuanced, but the point I'm making is I don't think it's just about only for big league catchers. There's another reason here, and it comes back to everyone should learn to be a great catcher. One of the things that people really struggle with is that concept of back foot to front foot attack. And if we put anyone in a right knee down stance, and you can slow it down when you see it right here. Notice how when you're in right knee down stance, it's really easy to take the back foot to where the front foot is and the front foot straight towards the target. And by just reinforcing this technique, we put our throwers in a great position. And so the progressions that we can run in a practice environment, these kids here are just throwing to a net. We can move it on from where they're at, which is ball in their glove. And we can then, have the balls being flipped into them. We can often have a coach and then a pitcher throwing to them. They can throw to themselves as a general progression until eventually getting out on the field. But again, just putting them in this right knee down stance affords them the opportunity to figure out how they get to that place where it's back foot, front foot attack, and not worrying about, well, how many steps do I need to take, and what happens if I stand up too soon. I think this is one of the best catch-all drills. Even if you never use a back knee down stance in a game, every catcher should spend some time in practice throwing from this position. Target throws. So real simple. We have just set up a target on the field, and you can put targets at multiple bases. This one is obviously at second base. But you can put it at third, you can put it first, you put it wherever you need to, but it is that straightforward. Let's think about getting back into that task-based versus game-based activity. This is not a game-based drill per se, because there's no game going on. There's no base runner. There's no infielder. The feed is coming out from an odd angle, but we can do things like making sure there's a hitter standing in. Maybe the hitter should actually have a bat and they should swing or pull a bunt back. There are lots of different things we can do to make this drill even more game-based than task-based. And then, of course, you can start making things more competitive, especially in this environment where you don't have to worry about how good the shortstop or second baseman is at catching and tagging. It's just a black and white, did you hit the target or not, is a nice way to start thinking about running competitions with your players. So again, back to you guys. What do you see? If we're going to coach up this catcher, can you see anything from some of the conversations that we've had around throwing that we might want to address? Answers in the chat box. This one's a little more subtle because he is doing a lot of good stuff. But there's one thing in particular that I think would be worth exploring. Yeah, Turt's got it. Bit of a long step. Now, is it terrible? Probably not. It's a pretty efficient, pretty good throw, but can we be even more efficient if that back foot isn't getting in front of his front foot? If you look at where it starts to where it finishes, might be in a little bit of a better place if that back foot is a little bit more of a jab step and not quite so jumpy. So yeah, Turt, nice one, man. Love it. Moving on. And then just, what can we do? We already talked about it, but what can you do to make it a little bit more game-like? Now, I have a request for left-handed catchers. For anyone who is a club coach, looks after their players, especially young players, but when I say young, they can be a young as in a child, or they can be young as in they've only been playing baseball for a couple of years. Both work for this point. Request for left-handed catchers. Why do I want more left-handed catchers? First off, where do left-handed players get stuck? Typically first base or corner outfield positions, especially if they are new players. But where do the best players typically play, especially at the higher levels? Not only do they play at shortstop, but invariably you find out that your first baseman used to be a shortstop, or your catcher used to be a shortstop, or your starting pitcher like Jacob deGrom used to be a shortstop. So the reason I'm saying this is I think that we are doing a disservice to left-handed players because they're not getting the opportunity to develop the same athleticism that other players do. I want to be clear. I'm not saying you now need to field a bunch of lefties in your middle infielder, but think about what can you do in your practice environment? Can you give people an opportunity that would normally just get stuck in right field and maybe throw 2 balls to the cutoff person a day? Can you give an opportunity to let them be a little bit more athletic and let these types of movements emerge, not just for our right-handed players, but for all players? And then moving on to plays at the plate. We're only going to be covering tag plays. We're not going to get to force plays today. I'm conscious I've already been talking for close to an hour, so I want to wrap this up fairly soon. But yeah, plays at the plate, old school, thinking about it, get low, get underneath the runner, don't let them knock you over. Now new school is very much more about staying on your feet for as long as possible. Left knee down, want to drop your knees to the plate, whereas now we're focusing on sweep tags, blocking the plate. For the old school, it was just what we did and how we did, like what are we going to do, whereas new school, we're trying to avoid collisions as much as possible. Common issues that we see. Number one, throwing the mask away. Now, I've included this photo in particular because collisions used to be almost an every game thing. And as a catcher myself, it was one of my favorite parts of the game. And I was quite disappointed when they introduced the Buster Posey rule, as my ego speaking. As a coach now, I am so thankful that collisions are just not a part of the game like they used to be. That being said, they still happen because sometimes there are bang bang plays. Once the catcher catches the ball, they are able to step into the line of the runner. All these types of things happen. And this photo was taken in 2019 after the Buster Posey rule. Had Lucroy kept his mask on, then Marisnik would have come in and it would have been face to mask collision as opposed to face to temple collision. So for me, this is the kind of the biggest thing that we need to make sure that our catchers are doing. And that is when we are doing plays at the plate in practice, every single time a catcher takes their mask off, that is the number one thing I tell them before anything else, regardless of what a good tag it was or whether there's some learning to do, but it's, we need to keep masks on. Exposing weak areas. If you think about and forth, and then where the armor is on the catching leg guard, if you're going to get hit, you want to be hit face on, not side on. You don't want the inside or outside of the knees being exposed. And then communication or lack thereof in particular, like catchers not talking enough and being too quiet on the field is a common issue that we see far too much in this country. Starting high. And what I mean by that is you've got to anticipate the ball coming in. If you think about infielders working low to high, same thing as catchers at the plate. Got to expect the ball is going to skip, expect the ball to stay down. So we want to work low to high. So a common issue is a catcher standing up too upright and balls beating them in their legs. So key points for plays at the plate. Mask on, stay safe, communicate, silent or cut number. So silent would be throws coming in and you don't say anything when the ball is in the air so that the ball just comes straight through to the catcher. Cut number would be the cutoff person is going to catch this ball, cut it, and then they're going to throw it to 1, 2, 3, or 4. There is a piece of communication that starts before this, which is lining up the fielders, directing traffic, left, 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 right, 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 making sure that the cutoff people are in the position they need to be. And it is our job as catchers, as the field generals, to take control of that. We are the eyes and ears of the coaching staff on the field, and on plays at the plate, we have to be taking control of this scenario. Show the run at the plate. So this is a part of the rule, but also we just want to avoid contact where possible. So we need to show the runners, ideally the whole plate, but at least the back portion of the plate until we have control of the ball. So make sure that we're positioning ourselves at the front of the plate to allow that. Working low to high so that we can handle any balls that bounce. And then having a sweep tag, weight forwards. I say sweep tag because I want to avoid contact wherever possible. For anyone that's concerned about, oh, well, I don't want the ball being knocked out of the glove, infielders are quite capable of delivering sweep tags and tagging people out. We catchers should be too. But the point of weight forwards is if there is a collision, we want to fall forwards so we can catch ourselves. Or worst case, if we get knocked out, then we're going to fall forwards onto our face as opposed to going backwards and landing on the back of our head, which again is just a huge red flag for potential concussions. So here we have a play at the plate. Lots of good things happening here. Getting to the front of the plate, sweep tag, really good things going on. Good communication, good play all round. One thing that we didn't talk about was finding the next out. And what do I mean by that is there's always something next to happen. In this play, we've got a runner running down to first base. So the catcher tags, gets the out, boom, what's that runner doing? The play might be over, but the game isn't over. And that's something that we sometimes miss out on. Again, one thing, if this was my catcher, what's the number one thing I'd be telling him? Put your mask on. Lucky, no collision, ball didn't bounce. We're in a great position, but I don't want to take that chance. Okay, we've got to keep that mask on. Okay, drills. How do we then practice plays at the plate? and how can we make it as game-based as possible? One of my favorite ways is just hitting ground balls at catchers. For this drill in particular, you can probably see just at the left of the screen, it's a coach with a fungo who's just hitting ground balls at his catcher, who's working on receiving the ball, making different types of sweep tags, some that he's going to his knees, some that he's staying more on his feet. But again, he's spinning out to the side, already setting up that movement to find the next out. How can we make it more game-like? What sorts of things can we do? You can add a target to tag. I'm a big fan of, you get a football or a medicine ball or a bucket or anything, and you roll it in for the catcher to have to tag. You don't have to throw it in like a collision, but just a moving target that they have to try and tag, as opposed to just tagging the imaginary base runner. And then again, thinking about how else can we make it more game-based? Can we add a base runner? In this case, we definitely want to get on the field, so we're having to deal with the dirt and the bases and all the different things that come out of it. Ultimately, it needs to be an outfielder or an infielder that's making this throw, not just a fungo bat. And then what I would also say, and this was something that I did, was go out and take BP on the infield in your full gear so that you get comfortable dealing with hops, short, long, bad, good, and everything in between. The asterisk is there just as a reminder, because obviously the infield is the territory of our infielders, so I don't want you guys to necessarily tick them off too much. But if the opportunity is there, and I did it myself, both over here, but also when I got to the States, as a way to just get more reps in. So in conclusion, and to wrap things up, I want you to take away. Think about practicing what matters. Receiving being the #1 skill. So make sure you spend time on it. Receiving cannot just be your bullpens and hope your catchers get better, but what can you do at practice and how can you construct drills around it to do it? But also thinking about what can you do around blocking and recognizing it's not just the block, but it's also the recovery and the throwing. Think about how you can improve that footwork, that back foot to front foot, and then attack. I also would like you as coaches, you don't have to, think and throw out all of your drills right now, but just think about how, when you're planning your practice, when you're working with the catchers, when you're running a session, is this drill more task-based or is it more game-based? And how can you adapt it one way or the other? For example, if you're running an inter-squad, what can you do to make that inter-squad a little bit more task-based if there's something you want to address with your catchers? For example, maybe you want to work on throws to second base, so every single base runner, regardless of their ability, is going to steal. That way, your catcher is going to be challenged by the best base runner, but your catcher is also going to start developing some confidence, because hopefully there's going to be a few weaker base runners that will be able to throw out. You obviously can't constrain an actual game, but there might be an opportunity to do that. All the way to the other end, hey, maybe you do need a task-based drill, but what can you do to make it a little bit more game-based? And then the other part is just a final, I guess, a call to arms around taking ownership of your development and the development of your catchers, and thinking about that old school versus new school mentality. And if you were a catcher like me, not getting stuck in what you were taught, but thinking about how the game has changed, where the game is moving, and what are the new techniques that are emerging because of it, and what do we need to be more aware of. If you want any more information on catching in general, if you are, if anyone here or you have players who are on the national teams program, encourage them to attend any of the mini camps that we run with the pitchers and catchers. If you're not in the national teams program, I run a program outside of it called Smarter Performance Baseball, where we offer in-person and online training, but there are also some fantastic resources on the internet. Many of these are, I would consider, mentors and friends, but catchandthrow.com, weinsteinbaseball.com, and stoutcatching.com are 3 great websites. Catching Twitter, where I pulled some of the videos from, are wonderful. And then these two books, so the Complete Handbook of Coaching Catchers by Jerry Weinstein, but the Baseball Playbook by Ron Polk. Like, this is old school knowledge and stuff, but some of it is very relevant. If we come all the way back to the framing piece and how we receive, the book talks about lifting the ball from underneath, but the principles of receiving have remained the same. The drills, many of them have remained the same, but the focus have changed. I think if you haven't got it, the Ron Polk book is just a fantastic way to look at old baseball, how baseball used to be taught. Not because it's a bad thing, because actually at least 80% of it is still relevant. There just might be 1 or 2 things that we need to change slightly. So That's everything from me. A quick thank you before we move on to the Q&A. If you want to get in contact, you want to reach out, best ways to reach me on Instagram are W Lintern34 is my Instagram handle, at Will_Lintern is Twitter, and then my GB Baseball email address is will.lintern@gbbaseball. So there we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. While you have a breather there and a sip of coffee or juice or whatever you've got there. Yeah, amazing how things have changed over the past years.
Indeed.
You went back to the years when I started playing in the early 70s, and wow, I've seen different techniques and positions and stuff like that. So people, if your questions for Will, please type it in. Let's get a bit of a Q&A going there. I'll start something off, Will, because this is something
Please do.
I get queried all the time as trying to teach youth catchers. Where would you position your right hand?
Great question. So first off, I would do, in terms of its position, hopefully you guys can see me. What I would do is I would tuck my non-throwing hand this way. So I would go thumb in and then put my fingers over the top. That'd be my starting place. Reason being is if the ball then hits my hand, it's going to open up this way. If I have a fist, then now when the ball hits my hand, I've got less opportunity, and that hand is a little bit more stuck. I would also say, I mentioned the story a little bit earlier, but in this position here, my thumb is exposed and my thumb nail could get caught, which did actually happen to me once, and that got ripped back, which wasn't a huge amount of fun on that day. A lot of athletic tape needed, but yeah, we just tucked it and wrap it. Now, once you're in this position, where is the best place for you? I would say wherever is comfortable, with one exception. Options being behind your heel, behind your knee, or tucked into your hip. Now, the one exception being behind the back, which is the one that's taught often as just a great starting point. I don't like that position. It doesn't put your shoulder in a great position. If we think about, then the transfer to throw with a runner on base, it's such a long position to get your hand into. So that's where I would start with. Tuck the thumb and then place it knee, ankle, or by your hip.
Perfect. Right. Everybody else, please get your questions in there. We have this opportunity to get some information out of Will. So please feel free to type it in there and let's get the chat going.
Yeah, feel free to type, or if you prefer, you can unmute. I'm not, hopefully not too scary that we can talk directly. How about this, Colin? Just out of interest, is there anything since you've come over and you've seen British baseball, is there anything that you've observed as being a common issue with catchers from your perspective?
I do. We, from a youth perspective, if I had to go back there, kids seem to sit in weird positions. So our back end is nearly touching the floor. So, yeah. For me, that's uncomfortable, first of all. Second of all, you can't get up into a throwing position.
Yeah.
So we sit to sit as opposed to sit to be in a ready position to move or throw the ball or stuff like that. So, or we'd sit, our butts would touch the back of our legs, and we sit upright like an L shape, like a chair. So I have no idea where that's taught and where it is, but that's not just here. South Africa was exactly the same. So I don't know where kids pick up that information from, but for me, it's weird to be able to go around and see things at different countries where I've been around, and they all start off in that position. So it's like you're taught to do that, but progressively you are then taught to move flat-footed, get your legs wider, get your bum up in like a horse riding jockey position, was the one term I heard somebody say.
Yeah.
Get off your knees. You're not playing. That's how the Japanese would do it. And I've heard all these sayings, and you've now shown us how everything has evolved. We've all gone back into that position again. So where you were most comfortable at as a catcher, and where it was easy for you to make a throw from, is you got into that athletic position that you felt was athletic for you, and that's where you threw the ball from, or that's where you received the ball from, or stuff like that. So as you said as well, there's not one specific way which is correct. You know, it's not you will sit like this, because sometimes it doesn't work for a certain player. So
yeah, absolutely. I think probably the point that you made around, and I just saw Kevin's question come in, so I'll jump on that in a second. But I don't think it's people instructing kids to be in that posture. I think it's just a lack of awareness. So let's just let someone do it. And then you see someone on a knee, and it's almost that little league knee where it's, you know, it's the same position that a coach gets into if he's flipping the ball someone underhand, which isn't a great athletic position. So then you kind of get into this headspace of, oh, well, being on a knee is bad. We don't want them to be athletic. So I think the goal is, can they perform in that position? Can they receive well? Can they block well? Can they catch well? And if they can't, then we adjust from there. But at the starting point for me is always get the heels down, plug them into the ground, put them in a great position, and then adjust from there. Kevin wanted to know any tips for a 6 foot plus catcher so that you give the umpire the best possible view. I would say, think about which shoulder the umpire is looking over, and then drop that knee would be a good starting point. And then actually set up your training environment to have an umpire. So when you're doing catching drills, have the umpire behind them so that they can provide live feedback. Or you could just take your cell phone, your mobile phone, and film the slot that the umpire would be looking through, and try different stances, as long as you keep the phone in roughly the same frame, and you can see how the shoulder position changes, how the glove angle changes, and go with what, you know, combination of what looks best and what feels the best, and hopefully they match up. It's always bad if you're in a place where what looks good but is the most uncomfortable position. So I would experiment with that way. But anytime if you use your phone to provide some objective data, then that would be great. Let's see, here we go. So Sean, what tips would you give a catcher working with a pitcher who is struggling to find the zone in the game? Great question, Sean. I would say a couple things. One, get a sense of where they're missing, and hopefully they're missing in one of two spots, either up and down or side to side, as opposed to everywhere. If they're missing everywhere, then it's just kind of like good luck. And you just got to figure it out, but there's still a solution for that. But if you think about, okay, so if a pitcher is missing up and down, then what I would do is, first off, remove any thought about mechanics in the game. You don't need a pitcher thinking about their mechanics. It's only going to hurt them, and it's going to make things worse. Try and get them to think about something that is objective. So if they're struggling if they're missing up a lot, if they're throwing over your head, then make them bounce the ball into you the next, you know, 1 or 2 pitches, and you'll be amazed to see if they try and bounce the ball, they'll probably end up throwing a strike. Your responsibility is, however, if you've told them, hey, I want you to bounce the ball, you've got to be ready to block it. And then the reverse would be true if they're missing low. If they continue to bounce the ball, tell them to throw over your head, and they'll probably get it right down the pipe. You just need to expect the ball to go up. And then you would use a similar tactic for east and west. So if they're missing side to side, if they're missing side to side, I would stop any movement. So I would just set up right in the middle and get them to try and focus on throwing the ball either to the middle or the opposite net, or maybe the opposite knee. So if they're missing inside, I'm going to be in the middle, but I want them to aim for my right knee. Or if they're missing on the other side of the plate, I'm going to set up in the middle and have them aim to my left knee. So that's what I would say. If you have a pitcher who is just missing everywhere and there's no consistency, then I don't know, ask them to close their eyes and try to throw. I have seen that work with one of our pitchers before, that they found accuracy when they closed their eyes. Tell them a funny joke, talk to them about anything other than pitching, anything about baseball would be the way to go about it. Or maybe move on to the next pitcher and see if they might be able to do. But that would be my advice, Sean. And then to follow on from that, I would try and use that same framework in practice to help them find their location. So, you know, there's a time and a place and you can use mechanics to your advantage, but sometimes we can get stuck in that mold of, well, this needs to be this way, this needs to be that way. Sometimes it's better just to focus on the outcome, focus on the external, and explore different ways for them to throw to different targets. And you could just go back to that method, or that concept rather, of being good at throwing things. Just add to it, be good at throwing things to targets. So you could take plyo balls, baseballs, tennis balls, American footballs, golf balls, and then you could set up different targets around your field or in the bullpen or wherever to throw, and just get them comfortable throwing and organizing their body in a way that helps them hit targets on the move, targets that are stationary, high targets, left targets, inside targets, outside targets. And I would construct the practice environment around that to help them, develop some of those tendencies. So I hope that helps a little bit there, Sean. It's certainly a challenge that we all face as catchers, dealing with pitchers that are missing their spots. Let's see, Chris, one of the issues was athleticism. Any further thoughts on developing athleticism and mobilities in catchers? Any exercises players can be doing away from the ballpark or practice field? Absolutely. I do have a couple of thoughts. I will caveat this with saying that Great Britain Baseball has a fantastic resource in Alan Dean, who is the head of and also coordinator for strength and conditioning. So if anybody has any follow-up questions and you want to go in to more depth with Alan, drop him a note, find a way to have a chat with him about, not just S&C, but this concept of adding and microdosing athletic sessions into your existing practice plans. I think he's a wonderful way of presenting it and a wonderful way of thinking about how it meshes in. As far as some specifics for catchers, I think we do a disservice to our ankles and we do a disservice to our hips. So maybe a little bit of extra time around hip mobility and some ankle mobility. But I was also think about particularly core stability and little things that I often jump in, like the ability to do a plank, the ability to perform a bear crawl, the ability to perform a push-up well. And you might say, oh, well, Will, you talked about hips and ankles, and aren't they just upper body exercises? But they're so reliant on the midsection, so reliant on your ability to stabilize your core. So your abs, your lower back, and your hips, it transfers into anything. And there's a reason why a lot of catchers in particular, but all professional baseball players, are doing a lot more yoga and Pilates than they used to, because they recognize that that's a great way to connect their upper and middle. And I think a lot of our mobility and strength issues stem from a lack of ability to connect top and to bottom. So top being your chest and back, bottom being your legs, through the middle. So that's where I would probably advise spending a decent amount of a player's time in practice. If you wanted to get them in a little bit earlier to have a little bit of a catcher's extra mobility session, that would be great. But just general principles of athleticism, it doesn't need to be too crazy, but move well. What does that mean? We need to be able to push, we need to be able to pull, push being a press up, pull being pulling something towards you. We need to be able to squat, we need to be able to hinge, and we need to have that core stability. So that's where I would focus on. And a lot of the core stability work, push-ups, bear crawls, planks, are really easy to incorporate into your sessions. And my final point on this is, you don't need to view it as an S&C session. It doesn't need to be a beast session at the end, to get people, leaving them sweating. It can be 5 reps at the start of the session to prime their body and prime their central nervous system for what's coming next. It doesn't always have to be about beasting. It can just be about better movement. Brilliant question, Chris. Thank you. Cool. Any other questions? Anything else anyone wants to ask about catching, receiving, blocking? Anything, maybe something we didn't cover?
Shy audience today.
Yeah.
Come on, everyone. Pop in something. There's got to be something that somebody's needs some expertise on, or another thought on, or a little bit of clearing up of something, or come on.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Colin, then. One last question from you. We'll give the audience 10 more minutes left. We'll give them time to think of one more, but hit me with something you want to know a little bit more of.
Right, your opinion, and you have answered me this slightly before, but I'm going to ask in the public.
Yeah, cool.
Catcher right-handed throwing catcher.
Yeah.
Would you pick him being right-handed batter or a left-handed batter?
Great question. Well, I mean, ideally lefty batter if you can. Why not? It'd be great to have always good to have a left-handed bat in the lineup. Even better, and we used to have this at the national team level, was having a switch hitter in Chris Bissett, and our current catcher, Christopher Chamois, he as well can bat a little bit from both sides. So yeah, I'm gonna one up you and say I want a switch hitting catcher is what I'd like. The one caveat I will say is if you, I am not a hitting coach, so therefore I would need to defer to someone like Brad Marcelino, or next week we have Jonathan Crammond to cover this. But in a conversation with Mars that I had, when you have someone who is opposite, so a righty thrower, lefty hitter, or the other way around, could be a lefty thrower and a righty hitter, you want them to finish with both hands on the bat, because you're trying to reduce the stress on the shoulder. So if you think about being a righty thrower but a lefty bat, if you then finish one-handed, then that external rotation, that extra pressure on the arm, is potentially an injury risk for you. So you're going to see a lot of guys like a Shohei Ohtani, for example, despite being extremely accomplished power hitter, two hands on the bat for the majority of his finishes now. So that would be my caveat from but I'm thinking about it from an arm position as opposed to a hitting position. But yeah, that's what I go with. Right-handed catcher, or but a switch hitter.
Yeah, we'd love to have a few more lefties. I know how we battle in the country now, and I'm talking now not so much on the baseball side of things, but me being the head coach of the men's softball team. I think I have one lefty in the team. I'd love to get a couple more lefties. I don't think our audience has gone shy.
I think that might be, yeah.
Ryan, come on, bud. You've always got lots to ask and lots to say. I'm putting you on the spot, yeah?
Like it.
Come on, Church. Tell me out there, bud.
Maybe we just covered everything there is to know about catching.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe we've shocked them a little bit, and they need to gather their thoughts on what you've now said, and everything, how it's evolved, and how do we plan the next session for a catcher, and
what didn't you cover? Well, I love it. Okay, like so many things I didn't cover. We didn't talk about fielding bunts. We didn't talk about force plays at the plate. We didn't cover catchers pop-ups. We didn't cover pitch calling. The leadership side of it, we talked very briefly about controlling the field, but we didn't talk about managing a pitching staff. Those are probably the big things that we didn't cover. And the science around game calling, pitch calling, working with your pitchers, I think is kind of that next level. That's what makes a great catcher, and I think that's so important and is definitely misunderstood. And that's maybe something we should come back and do. A future session on, Colin, is just talking about game planning and pitch calling and think about how we do this. Let's see. So Brian has come in and said, for youth batteries, how early should you build that relationship between the pitcher and catcher? Right from the very first practice. And I would say, especially with young people, you should have as many pitchers and as many catchers as possible. Like, you should rotate people through as many positions as possible, but think about that relationship and what you can do in the youth environment almost as a microcosm of having a great relationship within your community, because so many people are playing so many different positions. But I would say right from the first practice, right from the game. And, if you need to, as a coach, you might need to start stepping in and facilitating some of those conversations. I think, the truth of it is the relationship between youth pitchers and catchers is vastly different from the relationship at an adult or a professional level, but you still want them getting to know each other. You want them to be familiar with each other. And you really want your catchers to learn that they are in charge, that they are the boss. And so you should be reinforcing that and think about how you help pitchers understand their role in this. This is not to undermine that it's still a pitcher's responsibility. If they are not committed to a pitch, if they don't want to throw a certain pitch, they should shake it off. But The catchers are in control. It is their game. They're managing this system, and we need to empower the catchers from a younger age in order to have that control. So I think that's a great question. It's a tricky one as well. I mean, especially I think in this country, I think we have a little bit of a British tendency to be a little bit of a that kind of timid wallflower on the side, and stepping on the field and like shouting 1 1 1 2 2 2 and not really projecting our voice. And that might be part one. The relationship maybe will blossom when the catchers start taking a little bit more control. I think that's a primary job as coaches, is empowering catchers to take control and hold them accountable when they're not talking loud enough. I care less whether they get it right or wrong, more that they're talking loud enough so that A, they have control of the field, and B, me as a coach, I can now help them with their decision making. If a decision was poor decision, but they didn't talk, I don't know what was going on in their mind. I don't know if they made the decision or they didn't communicate the decision or something went wrong. It's always going to come back to talk loud, be loud, and then me as a coach or us as a coaching staff can then help them solve that. I think, yeah, Brian, I think you're right. It is quite hard to create the interest. Just Adam, from your perspective, Brian, if you're able to give me another response, what do you think the reasoning is? Is it a fear thing? Is it a lack of understanding around the position thing? Is it, I don't know, like what's your take? Because I think, yeah, okay, so it is more of a fear thing, in which case I would start with creating environments that just make the act of catching really fun, and whether it's simple things like anytime you're doing catches drills, it's more of those rolled balls, and whether it's thinking about blocking and thinking about receiving, rolled ball. So not even having to put a batter in there, and maybe it's just getting used to having a mask on and making it more of a game related, and it's something, hey, we're all going to do this. We're all going to experience what it's like to roll the ball and receive it, to roll the ball and try and block it. And that way you kind of make it more about everybody and not having to have the fear side of it. There is a side of it that you are going to have to find the person who is crazy enough to actually put the gear on and get back there. But I would start with, how can we make it as accessible in a training environment? Because obviously a game, it's too late. You need someone who's prepared to put the gear on. But training environment, what drills can you run? How can you make it fun? How can you make it really cool to be back there? Start mixing in some equipment, whether it's the glove or the mask, without it having to be too cumbersome, and then see who shows up. I mean, I, as a catcher, I didn't want to be a catcher at first. I didn't like the way, the equipment sat on me, and it was weird. And I, at 5'0", I decided I wanted to be a first baseman because Mark McGuire was my favorite player at the time. Then I went to a tournament with the Tunbridge Bobcats, and we didn't have a catcher. Our catcher wasn't able to make it. I can't remember if he was sick or he had school, but he wasn't able to go. So someone asked me if I was willing to catch, and I did it for the team, and then I fell in love with it. And but even then I still struggled for many years learning to have the confidence to block and learning to have the confidence of dealing with a bat swinging in front of your face. But that became I guess I just fell in love with it at that point. So yeah, I don't have a solid answer for dealing with the fear thing, because the truth of it is you have to be a little bit crazy to be a catcher. But I think as coaches, we should think about how can we create environments that could be a little bit more fun, a little bit different, that introduce the tendencies of catching and see what comes out of it. I hope that helps.
Right, we've run out of time. It's now 9 o'clock.
Awesome.
So all right, it's just great. Well, thank you. All right, so just from the chat there. So from my side, well, from a BSUK, and from me personally, I'd like to just thank you for your presentation and your input. Without these informative sessions that we do have, I still believe that we have lots to learn, and able to spread the word like you and I have chatted about before, giving back to the game for the love of the game and stuff like that. So for me, I could do this every week for hours and hours on end, and you would be the same, because like you said, you have so much more to give back, whatever. But I'd like to take this opportunity to say to everybody there, thank you for taking the time out to come and listen to Will, and we do appreciate what you do for the game, Will. Yes, anybody got questions for Will going forward, and you haven't had the time to put it out now, whatever the case is, please email Will directly. He definitely will get back to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, or if you haven't got Will's contact details, contact me. I'll get it off to Will, and we'll get Will to answer your questions and stuff like that. So other than that, I just want to thank everybody. And well, yes, we will definitely be talking more going forward. We have a lot of common goals and interests at the moment. So I think you and I are going to be spending a little bit more time chatting behind the scenes more than anything else. But I do appreciate your input and your views and everything. So thank you very much.
My pleasure as always. Thank you so much, Colin. Appreciate you inviting me on again.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a good evening.